When I was a child, I lived on a street with a haunted house. A large and happy family had lived in the house until a night when one of the children was playing with matches. The youngest boy of the family dropped a lit match on his bed but was too scared to call out for help. The boy was burned alive under his covers. His parents and 2 sisters died with him in the flames. One evening during a sleepover, my friends and I took turns trying to scare each other with ghost stories. It was approaching midnight and, unable to scare each other, we thought it would be fun to go to the haunted house in the dark. We walked through the gate together and up to what remained of the door, still set in its stone doorframe. The smell of smoke hung in the air, and thin clouds of ash were being blown in the breeze. As we turned to run, screams rose up out of the ashes. "Help us, we're burning," they cried. We started to run, thinking that as soon as we were clear of the house we would be safe. But the ash shapes and screams followed us. As we neared my home, the smell of burning was almost overwhelming, and as we reached my door, I glanced over my shoulder to see a hand reaching for me. We piled through my front door, slamming it behind us, and ran up the stairs to my room, slamming that door tight, too. None of us expected to sleep, but the fear had exhausted us and we fell into a deep slumber. The next morning, in the daylight, we were all much braver. During breakfast, we talked about what happened and came to the conclusion our imaginations had taken over. We decided to walk back to the house in the daylight. I opened my front door and my mouth dropped in a silent scream. There, on the door, were 2 large round scorches high on the door, like someone had pounded on it with burning hands. Lower down, there were 2 smaller sets of handprints, as if children with burning hands had pushed against it. Finally, near the bottom of the door was a tiny set of burnt handprints, as if the youngest little boy had tried in vain to push open the door and get help for his family. Lately, I was chatting with a coworker of mine. She had recently taken a trip to one of America's most haunted cities, Savannah, Georgia. Though she had spent good money on a ghost tour, she returned from her trip with no real-life ghost story to share with me. However, she did not disappoint. As we spoke, she began to tell me of her teenage years and the strange and terrifying experiences she had during a handful of sleepovers. What she said to me not only sent chills down my spine, but set my pen to paper in a rush to record every detail. Amanda's friends were typical, intelligent young girls. They went to school, they wondered about the future, they had sleepovers. But after an encounter with unexplainable happenings and a message from a medium, it would become clear that one of Amanda's friends was not a typical teenager. Amanda began telling me about the different strange activities she experienced. During a sleepover, she was beguiling her friends with a retelling of a nightmare. "I went to the window," she said, pointing to the very window that had starred in her dream. And, all on its own, the roll-up blinds shot up. And staring at me from outside the window was the Grim Reaper. Just as the words escaped her mouth, the blinds on the window rolled itself up. The sound of the canvas hitting the window frame sending electric shocks of fear down every spine in the room. Another sleepover found Amanda and her friends in the basement. A Ouija board made of permanent marker and a greasy pizza box sat before them. "Are there any spirits with us?" one of the girls asked. The cardboard spirit board did not respond, but a black shadow streaked across the basement wall to the stairs. Gasping, but unable to contain their excitement, the girls raced up the basement stairs after the shadow. At the top sat a little doll, kicked over onto its side. No one could explain what they saw, but they all agreed, it was the creepiest thing they'd ever seen. So far. Then Amanda began telling me a story unlike anything I'd heard before. The sincerity of the story, the lingering fear that lived her words, could only lead me to believe she was telling me the absolute truth. It was another sleepover. Same friends, same antics. The house was newly built, one of the cookie-cutter houses in the developing subdivisions. The neighborhood was mostly made of freshly dug earth and halfway completed landscaping. 5 of the 3-story houses were complete. The house had neighbors, but not many. It almost felt like a country home. Isolated. Amanda was on the computer just outside the kitchen on the first level. The rest of the sleepover was on the 3rd floor. As she was checking her Facebook, she could hear someone moving a cup around in the kitchen. Clunk. A few seconds later, another clunk. As though someone was taking one sip at a time and setting the nearly empty cup down hard on the counter between sips. She quickly went upstairs to be close to her friends. But she did not tell them what she'd heard. She didn't want to sound paranoid. But one of the other girls went downstairs and returned stating she heard someone moving a cup around in the kitchen. I didn't want to say anything, Amanda spoke up. But earlier I heard it, too. A general feeling of insecurity began to overwhelm the girls. They were all alone with hardly any neighbors, and it sounded like someone else was in the house. Quietly, they crept into the bathroom and locked themselves in. One of the girls called the closest neighbor boys and asked if they could come over to check things out. The boys called. We can see someone in your kitchen window, said one of the boys. Moving around. A white figure. Panic began to set in. The resourceful girls began heating up straightening irons, preparing to fight. Brienne, the host of the sleepover, called her mother. There's someone in the kitchen. Brienne's face twisted with fear as she listened to her mother on the other end. No, I swear. I'm not making this up. Can you come home, we're really scared. After a moment, she hung up the phone. Her mother had just received a call from her sugared-up teenage daughter during a sleepover. She had not taken her plea for help seriously. The girls were on their own. But where were the boys? Had they left? Were they too afraid to come in and help? Footsteps could now be heard. One deliberate stomp after the other, climbing the stairs. From the kitchen in the 1st floor to the landing on the 2nd. Thump, thump, thump. Whoever it was, whatever it was, they were coming for the girls. The heavy footfalls were drawing nearer and the girls crowded together, eyes glued to the door, waiting for the shadow to fall upon the gap at the floor. At last, the footfalls could be heard on the landing just outside the bathroom door. It had made it to them. Just a door width away. Suddenly, there were shouts from the kitchen. Brienne. Amanda. Girls. Are you here? The neighbor boys. The girls began screaming and shouting from the bathroom. Upstairs. We're in here. Help. Thundering footsteps ran up the stairs. A herd of teenage boys coming to the rescue. They had returned home only briefly to retrieve baseball bats after spotting the figure in the kitchen. They blazed into the bathroom and began sweeping the house. Every room was empty. There was no evidence that anyone else had been there. As Amanda was telling me this, I could tell she's leading me somewhere. It turns out my friend, Brienne, she continued, had a lot of things like that happen to her. Once she could hear someone jumping on her bed, but when she looked no one was there. Then she heard someone in her walk-in closet. When she approached the doorknob rattled. No fucking way, was my response. It wasn't an indication of disbelief, it was a plea for more juicy details. So, later, Amanda went on. One of Brienne's neighbor approaches her. She tells her that she's a medium and has something important to tell her. The medium says, I have to tell you that you have a spirit following you. It is a jokester spirit. Whatever that meant, well, I guess it is self-explanatory. And it really does explain a lot. If you can believe in those sort of things. But one of the things I found interesting was that any time Amanda witnessed something otherworldly, Brienne was always there. And the girls are still friends to this day, but the ghostly encounters have ceased. Was the jokester spirit real? If so, did he get bored of Brienne because she grew up and began? I have no answers for you. That is what makes stories like these so enjoyable. We cannot explain them. We can only enjoy hearing about them, or, in some cases, live through them. Frightened by the paranormal incidents that had already occurred in a small rented house, my son and I were afraid to go to sleep inside and settled down to spend the night on 2 sofas in the courtyard. Suddenly, the light in the house flashed on and off twice by itself, and some vague noise was heard. What else is there for a terrible surprise? I thought with fear and nervously pulled the door of the house. It was locked, and the key that had been in the lock was gone. Not immediately, but after several unsuccessful attempts, the door still opened, and when I burst into the apartment full of anxious forebodings, I saw that from all the taps, in the kitchen and in the toilet and in the sink and shower in the bathroom, water was flowing straight with a murmuring stream on the floor, because some invisible and unknown force not only opened the water, but also pulled out all the drain hoses, as it was last time. But this time the water was also flowing from the shower, the hose from which was lying on the shower floor. The washing machine came to life again and again in some unknown way. Per wire, it turned out to be plugged into an outlet, the door was closed, the washing program was set, and at the same time the drain plug was unscrewed and the water from it also flowed to the floor, where there was already a layer of water 2 or 3 inches high. Gnome, look what's going on here. What a horror. How am I supposed to bail out all this water? I almost cried to my son. The main thing is not to panic, Heya. The son noticed. I rushed to close the taps and insert the drain hoses. On the way, I pulled the wire of this aggressive washing machine out of the socket with all my might and, fortunately, it, with meat, pulled out of the water. Then I took a bucket and a shovel and hurriedly began to collect water. But as soon as I managed to remove at least some of the water, the taps ruthlessly opened again and, of course, the drain hoses were pulled out just as callously. And finally, as if indignant at my stupidity and misunderstanding that it would have been necessary to at least just leave there a long time ago, the massive metal entrance door began to slowly but inexorably close. Gnome! Gnome, come here quickly. Hold the door. Help me. You know I'm claustrophobic. I'm terrified of closed doors. And also, I don't want to be doused with toilet cleaner. I don't want to. I'll try to put things in order in the morning. Let's try to sleep now anyway. I offered, sobbing. I think this is the only reasonable solution, Heya, Gnome agreed. And my son and I, having wished each other at least a little good night, again settled down on our sofa in the The night turned out to be quite cold and, trying to keep warm, I wrapped myself in a warm blanket and, closing my eyes, already began to fall into a light doze, but suddenly woke up trembling from cold weather. How cold I am! I thought, and when I opened my eyes, I was surprised to understand why. My blanket, it's gone, that's why I'm so cold. Where can it be? It's not fair, I don't want to freeze completely tonight. It has to be found. I thought. Yes, here it is hanging on the tiled cone-shaped roof of our guest house. And it doesn't hang too high, but its tip hangs down to the front door. I noticed and jumped up from the couch barefoot and ran for a life-saving blanket.